strategically ridiculously foolish. The great historian Bat Yaor has argued in her groundbreaking studies of dhimmitude, which is the institutionalized second-class status that Islamic law mandates for non-Muslims under Islamic rule, and there'll be more on that later. She has argued, quite cogently I believe, that it is imperative at this time for the historical dhimmi communities, the communities of those non-Muslims who were subjugated under the rule of Islamic law and will be subjugated again if Islamic rule is established anywhere in the world, it is imperative for them to band together, to ally, to unite, and to fight against this common threat. The Crusaders, perhaps it is anachronistic to expect them to have that kind of perspective, but nonetheless, had they had it, and had they asked the Jews for help as they went across Eastern Europe, and invited them to join them, history might be different in very, very many important ways. And that was a disastrous thing. And it was even worse when they went into Jerusalem and burned the synagogue in which the Jews had taken refuge. There's no excusing that, and there's no discounting that. But these atrocities, and that is what they were, do not change the fact that the Crusades in themselves, as they were called, were not an imperialistic exercise, and were not unprovoked, but were a defensive action on a very small scale. There was no attempt to recover Egypt. Well, there was in a later crusade, but it was not even really an attempt to recover Egypt. It was sort of a tactical maneuver into Egypt in order to put pressure on the Holy Land. There was no attempt to recover Syria, no attempt to recover any of the lands that had been conquered. It was only an attempt to secure the Levant. And that's it. Now, the Crusades, one may argue, and I think that it is a reasonable argument that can be made, were a perversion of the spirit and the teachings of Christianity and of Christ himself in taking up arms in this way. Christianity, in its major branches of Catholicism, of Orthodoxy, and of most of the Protestant sects, has never been absolutely strictly pacifistic. But except for the Crusades, except for the 200-year period of the Crusades, has never been so explicitly connected to open warfare either. And so that's something that can be argued, but nonetheless, it is a fundamentally different thing from the Islamic jihad theology. In Islam, in the Quran, chapter 9, verse 29, Muslims are told to fight against those who do not believe in Allah and His Messenger, and do not forbid what He has forbidden, even if they are of the people of the book, which is the Quranic designation primarily for Jews and Christians, until they pay the jizya, which is a tax, with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. Until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. Now this is an isolated verse, and you can say, and people say this to me about 8 or 10 times a day, that I'm taking the verse out of context, cherry-picking verses in my insane hatred and bigotry, and picking out this verse and making much of it, when really that you can find verses in the Bible that are damaging as well. Yes. The difficulty with that idea, with that claim, that this is one verse taken out of context, is that, well, there's several. One is, Muslims have acted upon it throughout Islamic history. Second, all the schools of Islamic jurisprudence, the 4 major Sunni schools, the Shafi'i, Maliki, Hanafi, and Hanbali schools, as well as the Shiite Jafari school and the other Shiite schools, they all teach, not just one of them, but they all teach that it is the responsibility of the Ummah, of the Muslim community worldwide, to wage war against unbelievers and subjugate them under the rule of Islamic law, in which subjugated status they will pay this tax and will accept other various humiliating and discriminatory regulations that ensure that they feel themselves subdued as per the Quranic verse. So in other words, we hear many times in America, and I'm sure you've probably heard it here as well, that the aggressive stance and violence toward unbelievers manifested by Osama bin Laden and by others is a twisting and a hijacking or perversion of the true peaceful Islam. Now, one would expect that if that were true, one would be able to come up with at least one sect or one school of jurisprudence that actually did teach that Muslims ought to get along with other people and not try to either kill or subjugate them. Can't we? I mean, even just one? But there isn't one. Even the Ahmadiyya, who are widely, or the Sufis, well, the Sufis are another story, but the Ahmadiyya first are a group that's generally considered heretical. And one of the reasons why they are considered heretical and violently persecuted in Pakistan is because they teach that there's no space for violence in jihad. But does that mean they don't teach jihad? Does that mean they don't teach that there ought to be the imposition of Islamic law over the unbelievers such that they are set into this status of institutionalized discrimination? No, of course they teach that. They just teach it ought to be done by different methods. That's all. And so, pardon me if I don't find that comforting. The Sufis also are widely reputed to be peaceful when there is absolutely no evidence of that whatsoever. The Sufis are mystical. That's not the same thing. To devote one's life to prayer and so on does not necessarily mean that one does not wish to take up arms. If you read Al-Ghazali, who was the titanic thinker for the Sufis, he is very clear about the responsibility that Muslims have to fight the infidels and to kill them or to bring them into the rule of the Muslims. And the Sufis have been at the forefront for centuries of the jihad against the Russians in the Caucasus that is centered in Chechnya. And not only that, but Hassan al-Banna, who was the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is an international Islamic organization that is dedicated in its own words, and I quote from an internal Brotherhood document that was captured by law enforcement in the United States and released last year. The brothers must understand that their work in America, and I expect this goes for Europe as well, is a kind of grand jihad in eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within and sabotaging its miserable house so that it is eliminated and Allah's religion is victorious over other religions. The organization that is dedicated to this as a goal was founded in 1928 in Egypt by a gentleman, Hassan al-Banna, Tariq Ramadan's grandfather. And Hassan al-Banna was very, very deeply taken with the Sufis and instituted various Sufi exercises to be required of the early Muslim brothers as part of their daily religious observance. And so, not only that, but Ayatollah Khomeini, with whom I suspect you're familiar, he was also very influenced by Islamic Sufism and wrote some really very fine poetry, I think, mystical poetry, if you like that sort of thing. And he of course, is famous for saying that I spit on the foolish souls who say Islam is a religion of peace. It's his spittle, not mine. He said it. So, the difference ought to be striking, that there is no tradition of warfare against, there's no theological school of Christianity, there is no sect of Christianity that teaches that Christians must make war against unbelievers and subjugate them under the rule of Christian law. And there is no such thing as Christian law. Christianity does not offer the kind of comprehensive legal system that regulates every minute aspect of life that Islam offers. And so there is no such in Christianity. The Crusades arose out of various historical circumstances and ended at a certain point, such that, it would be the most wildly surprising and unexpected thing. I think we can lay odds that it won't happen, that the Pope today would call a crusade. And in jihad, in Islam, jihad is central, jihad is martial, jihad is supremacist, and jihad is universal. It's taught by all the sects and schools. And so to speak about the problem of the Crusades as if they are the source of the ill will between the West and the Islamic world ought to be clear at this point as obviously nakedly manipulative. Now, Bill Clinton obviously doesn't realize he's not the one manipulating. He is being manipulated by a concerted propaganda effort. Really, Islam is the only religion that has a sophisticated propaganda machine. and that has a concerted campaign to burnish its image. It's very interesting when you hear Islamic spokesmen talk so often, if they are condemning